Chapter 11, Being Sure. At the front gate, a maid came and offered to escort me to her lord. As I followed along, I passed the fountain in the middle of the garden. It had the statue of an eagle in the middle and the thing seemed almost alive as its eyes shone red. After that uncomfortable experience, I went inside the mansion and the first thing I noticed was the banner on the wall. Something that would catch the eye of anyone who entered. It was a red hawk spreading its wings in a black and green field. This was Arthur's banner, and also where his new banner name came from, Red Hawk. He was more of a snake than a hawk. But the banner rarely represented the people that owned it. "This way, my lady," said the maid as she pointed where we would be walking towards. Damn, that man, he still kept calling me a lady to this day, and even his servants did the same. I knew he did this to spite me. As we went on the third floor, at the end of the corridor, I was guided towards a room with 2 guards outside. When I got closer, I could hear the means of a woman. Ah. 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 Yes. Fuck me, my king. Ah yes, the 2 slave whores he bought. The degenerate already had 3 kids with 3 different mothers. 2 were slaves and one of the women was a maid. "Come inside me, my king." A loud screech followed after that demand. I heard a grunt and then, "Guards, call for Alyssa, the cute blonde maid, real quick. I need her for something." And there was the degenerate himself. It was almost unbelievable sometimes that a man as successful as him had so much free time. The maid who had guided me here shifted nervously next to me. "My lord, Alyssa is taking care of the kids." There was no answer initially and only the sound of some shuffling within the room. After that, the door opened, and out of it came Arthur. He was wearing only a pair of short pants and his surprisingly muscular body was quite a sight. I always assumed that the tales of him being a warrior were lies. But it seemed like there might be some truth to those rumors. But all of those thoughts of him being some warrior disappeared from my mind once our eyes met. His dark eyes locked into my brown ones and an almost unnoticeable smirk appeared on his face. "Well, hello there, my lady. I am truly sorry for you to have found me in such an embarrassing situation." I just snorted in annoyance at his lies. "You know everything about everyone, so spare me the pleasantries, Arthur." For a split second I felt a chill go down my spine. As I looked at him, Arthur was still smiling. "I let such a lady like you wait for me outside of my door. That is very rude of me. Please come inside, my lady." No way I was going to his creepy harem room. So I calmly stated, "No thank you. I only need a moment from you." He went back inside the room and came back out after not even a minute. Now he had put on some clothes and looked presentable, wearing black pants and a baggy aristocratic white shirt. "Follow me, my lady, let me escort you to my office," he said politely, the polite smile never leaving his face. As we went to the room closest to the bedroom, he just fucked 2 women. "You guys stay outside," he ordered the guards as we entered the new room that seemed like a normal office. Though it seemed a little too modest in comparison to the rest of the wealth displayed in the mansion. He sat on his chair behind the desk and then gestured to me to sit down too. I reluctantly sat down. "So tell me," he started the conversation first. "What do you want to talk to me about?" Now it was time to play this man who thought with his balls and not his brain. Lover everyone else, even Arthur had a weakness. I looked into the merchant's deaths recently, even though I started the conversation like that. There was no reaction from him. Not surprisingly, I have found some suspicious activities that might indicate foul play, on your part. "Oh." Arthur raised a questioning brow, seemingly unbothered by this. "Is that so?" There was an uncomfortable silence between us as neither said anything. Arthur sighed and leaned back on his chair. "What are your so-called accusations?" he asked in a bored manner, looking at his nails. This vile man truly knew how to annoy someone. I took a deep breath before I exploded at him. "There are accusations that you might have hired assassins to deal with your rivals." He frowned for a split second, and then his face relaxed. In the end, he just waved off my insinuated threats. "I am sure they are all lies. After all, the Iron Bank has already investigated the problem, and even though the deaths may seem suspicious, they were truly accidents." Yet, I knew that he and the Iron Bank were as thick as thieves for some reason. They were always backing up and covering for each other. This was all due to after losing my business to Arthur, he started selling ships to the Iron Bank for the best prices, only 130 gold for medium-sized ships. But I have been thinking lately. I drew on, trying to make him squirm. "Because someone might be assassinating the merchants. I am planning to put this on the attention of the Sea Lord." His expressions didn't show anything. But I knew that he was smart enough to know that he would be in big trouble if the Sea Lord, the voted ruler of Bravus, was to get involved in this. Arthur would be under constant watch if the Sea Lord got involved, and the bastard wouldn't be able to do anything. And in case he slipped up, he would be held responsible for his actions. I had everything planned and used all of the savings to hire 30 sellswords. They would escort me to the Sea Lord's palace when I got out of here, just in case. Of course, Arthur was undoubtedly smart enough to see what I was insinuating here. There was a way for him to get out of this. He just needed to bribe me to not talk. That would buy my silence, temporarily. Until I eventually will come back and next time demand more. So let's see, what will your answer be, Arthur? You have already lost, all just because you underestimated me. Go tell him, I don't care. He shrugged, still acting unbothered by the situation. Oh, so that was your answer? Well then. Excuse me, I got up and turned around, ready to walk away. Oh yeah, Mora, you forgot something, Arthur called out to me, and as I turned around. Swish, asterisk. Hey? I felt something piercing my neck, and it felt like hot liquid was spewing out. I looked at Arthur and saw the indifferent look on his face. Oh. I get what was happening. I could feel my vision going dark around the edges of my eyes, but before darkness calmed me, I heard some words, from my killer. When you search for something, always be sure what it is that you are looking for. That way you won't be led astray. His words felt strange for some reason. Then I heard footsteps, probably his. The sound stopped and I faintly heard him say something again. Oh, and I never underestimated you just because you are a woman. That would be foolish, you were ambitious, so that also made you dangerous, and I always expected for you to bare your fangs at me. Then I felt him rubbing my hair. But you were still very useful nonetheless. Chapter 12, Useful I. Arthur, MC, POV. I cleaned my knife with a white cloth as I looked at Mora's dead body. While sitting at the table I couldn't help but try to comprehend her thinking process. Did she think I wouldn't kill her? True, this will leave many clues that would lead to me, and many people saw her here too. Maybe she didn't understand just how much power money had. Just a couple of gold pieces will shut up anyone and have them say that they had never seen her. Ah, maybe her mistake was trusting others to have her back. Sadly, everyone around here wanted gold pieces, and they wouldn't try and fuck over someone like me and risk their lives. The ones who thought themselves heroic would try, and would die. Usually, those kinds of heroic people pulled the ones around them into trouble too. So their family will have to be killed also. After all, I wouldn't want some son coming at me for revenge when I killed his father. Many people misunderstood and thought that this would start an endless chain reaction in which the wife's family would then go after me for killing her daughter. But that wasn't the case. After all, would they want to risk their whole family's life for a daughter who was already dead? There were still other family members, so they wouldn't want them dead too. People were cowards deep down, many spoke the talk but couldn't walk the walk. Though being a coward wasn't necessarily a bad thing, it would keep you from making stupid mistakes and not do something like going against people who could annihilate their whole family. I was a coward too. I am not strong enough to give my enemies a second chance. A truly strong man would have taken the chance with Mora and tried to reconcile things even after she did something like this. But I was a coward after all, and took the easy route, killing her off and eliminating my worries of her ever going against me. Looking at Mora, I couldn't help but label her as a brave person. She had the guts to come and threaten me in my home territory. Sure, it was a stupid decision, but a brave one at the same time. She feared me, but overcame that and came to threaten me. Sigh, what a shame for her to end up this way. She was so useful with her determined demeanor and work. Because even when she worked for me, the ships she built were of very good quality. Her pride and honor wouldn't allow her to ever give me a reason to ridicule her abilities or the ships. Look, we're doing all that got her, a corpse on the ground. I used to be something reckless myself, back in my first world. Monsters aren't born, they are made. Guards, I called out nonchalantly. In an instant, the door is opened and a dozen guards rush in. Their eyes wandered around, looking for an enemy. When they saw the body on the ground, the shock on their faces was visible. But they didn't ask any questions. After all the gold I spent choking down their throats, they better not ask or say anything. I grabbed a goblet of water nearby and drank some and started explaining what happened. She tried to assassinate me, chop her up, and drop the pieces in the sewers. You will gain 3 gold coins as a bonus after you get the job done. They nodded silently and took the body away. As they were almost outside, I called them over again. Oh yeah, tell someone to clean the blood. If it stains, change the floor. After that, I went outside and entered the room close by. Or as many people called it behind my back, the harem room. When I got inside, 2 women laid down on the bed, sweat glittering on their skins. One of the women had very distinctive Valyrian features with silver hair and purple eyes, Aldia. The other had olive skin and brown eyes, her name was Kara. Both were in their 20s. I didn't bother to remember their exact ages. Kara was tired, breathing heavily, and she looked at me. Did you kill someone again? I only narrowed my eyes at her and she backed off and apologized. Sorry, that was out of line. I mean, did you allegedly kill someone again? The smirk on her face was as close as she would get to a smile. No, of course not, I replied politely. But her smirk was enough to tell me that she wasn't stupid enough to not see such things. Can you stop it with the boring stuff? Kara, whined the silver-haired Aldia, all this serious talk is bumming me out. Let's continue where we left off. Shit it, slut, Kara was fast on her reply, not missing a beat and looking at the silver-haired woman like she was a bug. The only thing you care about is sucking and fucking, so don't try talking too much. Aldia looked annoyed by this and puffed out her chest, and her body shone with sweat, making her even more alluring. And the sly look she sent me made it obvious that this was an intentional move from her. She then looked back at her rival and opened her mouth, about to say something, and then stopped. Oops, I forgot what I was about to say, Arthur, you made me forget. Kara turned her back on it and laid on the bed. I am tired and sleepy, so have the slut do all the work this time. She will like it even if you break her. The silver-haired woman ignored her completely and kept smirking at me and biting her lips sensually. I had bought them as slaves, but when I had come back to Bravos, I released them to become free. Obviously, they came back to me even as free people, it wasn't out of some sense of gratitude or love. Because even if they were free, what were they gonna do? Become bankers? They were pleasure slaves, at best they would become prostitutes if they didn't follow me. So rather than going to brothels to be beaten and abused by strangers, they would rather come to me, where they got the best treatment and only needed to satisfy my urges and give me kids. Bravos was a free city, slavery was illegal. Money was useless in this matter too. But just like Daenerys freeing slaves didn't work, this was also the same kind of situation. Just going and telling them that they were free didn't mean anything. If one wanted to collapse slavery as an institution, it needed to be done by someone who knew the dirty deeds like the back of their hand. Even killing their masters wouldn't be enough. Arthur, the Valyrian woman, called my name, bringing me out of my thoughts while looking at me like a vixen. She was always playful and ready whenever I needed her. They have both been good at their job and given me children. One of them was Oliver, he had my dark eyes and his mother's silver hair. The other woman in my bed had also given me a child. His name was Trey and he looked like a mini-me. I also had another child and that was with the maid. We only did the deed once during a fest when I was bored. As I laid down on the bed with them and purple eyes looked straight at mine and she pulled my pants down. She had a smile on her face as she swallowed my shaft. Well, I knew I was a good master to them and inspired loyalty, loyalty with gold of course. While laying down, my mind worked on new plans. After all, only those who always plan and are adaptable can succeed in life. Aldia seemed to get the signal and didn't make any noise while bobbing her head up and down. I knew that the Iron Bank had some spies in the mansion, so it won't take long till they learn of this incident. I already told everyone who served me that if they were offered a bribe, they should take it. Then they can come and tell me about it, with that I will be able to come up with some false information to feed to my enemies, and friends. Also for every spy, the Iron Bank had on me, I had 10 on them. Humans or otherwise. Suddenly the door opened, bringing me outside of my thoughts, and saw that it was the maid. She had green eyes and dark hair. My lord, the maid bowed slightly, making her braless breasts jiggle. That right there was a reason I chose her amongst all the other maids. You called for me. I did? Oh, right, when the now-dead female shipbuilder came to my door and called her over. Yeah, you must have been tired taking care of the kids, they can be quite a hassle sometimes. Wait, I think it was a different maid I called here. The guards probably don't know who Alyssa even was, well she resembled a Lannisters, probably some bastard of that bloodline. After all, with how many Lannisters there are, I don't doubt one of them came to Bravos sometime in his life to spread his genes. She smiled happily at the mention of the kids. No, my lord. It's quite nice taking care of them, though young Oliver always seems to be a little harsh. Maybe he took after your warrior side? But did you know that Trey can crawl the fastest? Also, Gerald's face as she tries to figure things out is so cute. I just zoned out the rest, 2 of those babies weren't even her kids. But she always took care of them and she bragged like they were her own. Well, Kara and Aldia wouldn't be good mothers anyway, it didn't matter that she took care of the kids. Oh yeah, this maid's name is Flitz, I forgot that for a second. Okay, so they are all impressive, I interrupted her. But the reason you were called here was to have some fun. Previously she had been a maid but now was a head maid. Her duties were taking care of the children and ordering the other maids around. Though I had another head maid to manage the maids. Flitz would be too soft on the workers and let them laze around. Being kind wasn't always a good trait, one needed to know when to put their foot down. Be by fun, she stuttered and her ears turned red as she blushed, do you mean have, you know. She then looked at Aldia who was still enthusiastically sucking me off. I wouldn't have noticed that Phyllis was even pregnant if I didn't get a signal from my blood magic that I had another child of my blood in her. So Gerald would have been just another kid in the streets if it hadn't been for my blood magic. Come on now it's time for you to relax, I mentioned towards her, and the maid shyly nodded while looking at the silverhead swallowing my shaft like a champ. Having you burn out there and get too tired, who would be able to educate the youngsters? So please, take care of yourself. My words made her blush slightly again. She swallowed her nervousness and took off her clothes. The giant breasts that were hidden under that maid's uniform spilled out. The flush that came to her face was something that always confused me. After all, we have had sex multiple times, yet she always seemed embarrassed. Was she faking it? I doubted it, her emotions were always too pure. Come on now, don't be too embarrassed, I encouraged her, but she looked at the silverhead. Aldia just continued her nocturnal acts. Oh, so that's what's bothering you? Don't worry, I won't force you to kiss her or do something with another woman. Thank you, my lord, she sighed in relief. No, I smiled gently. There is no need to thank me, and waved off her kindness. I patted her silver head and she looked at me. Immediately Aldia got my signals and started crawling towards me. The maid, Flitz, looked at us from the sidelines while Kara was asleep. What are we going to do to me now? Aldia whispered in my ear, her hands tailing my body. She was about to saddle me. She always knew what I wanted. Are you gonna split me in half with your cock while the innocent young maid watches us? I pushed Aldia to the side and pinned her to the bed. Her breasts bounced beautifully due to the movement, and the vixen smile on her face made her irresistible. She then leaned forward and whispered, "Destroy me," as her legs locked in around my waist and dragged me closer to her. Aldia's hand trailed and she touched the dagger that I had just used to kill someone before coming here, and let her know while picking it up and putting it in my hand. Well, that dagger seems quite sharp, how about we play a little game? Taking a hold of my hand, she slowly dragged the dagger towards her throat. The smile on her face was an excited smile and her eyes had an intense look as she gazed at me. Be careful please, she said playfully, as I penetrated her. Her nether hole perfectly hugged my shaft, her insides warm and tight. Don't get me too excited or else, if my body jolts, the dagger will rip out my throat. This wasn't something I had ever done before, having someone endanger her life just for the thrill of it. If you keep this up. I picked up the dagger and swung it down, her eyes widened in fear. The fearless act was all gone and only raw fear adorned her wild being. Fwish! The dagger stabbed right next to her face, sinking in the bed down to the hilt. Only I control when you die, even if you yearn for death unless I want you to. Aldia, you aren't allowed to die. With that, I grabbed her by the hips tightly and impaled her with my shaft, each thrust going deeper than the other. Her surprised moans rocketed the room as a crazed smile adorned the beautiful face. Yes. She agreed, but it came out more like a moan. Her eyes wandered towards the naked maid every now and then, and with a smirk, I asked. Do you like it when someone is watching you get fucked like a two-bit slut? I murmured. Do you? Yes, she moaned, not bothering to suppress her voice, trying to use her feet that were locked behind my wrist to drag me even closer to her. I picked her up, our bodies mashing together as I was still inside her as her back slammed against the wall. Her insides got even tighter from the pain, and she hungrily kissed me. Let's make another child and have that dumb cow take care of them. The agreement that she was expecting didn't come, and she seemed a little disappointed. But my answer only came with the fastening of my thrusts, till I felt her insides clench even tighter, this time making my junk almost feel pain from how tight she got. That was my limit as I spilled my cum inside of her, and the horny look on her face didn't subside at all. You are my favorite girl, I complimented her and kept thrusting in her, not even bothering to have her clean my seed out of her. I ignored that proud smirk that appeared on one face due to me calling her my favorite. Hours passed as our bodies were connected as one for hours, though I used the maid sometimes. She wasn't the same as Aldia. The latter always got up no matter what and seemed to become even more excited the more control I expressed over her and the more demanding I became. In the end, though, both ended up in the bed with my seed spilling out of them. Chapter 13, Useful 2. I put on some clothes and went to see my kids. They were playing together in a children's room, and a maid was always looking after them. Gerald, the son that I had with the maid. He was alone, trying to mix some shapes, and Oliver was bullying his other brother. Oliver, what did I tell you? I picked up my silver-haired son, getting him away from Trey, who looked like a mini-me, with dark hair and eyes. Never hurt your family, we are all that we have. Blood is thicker than water, always remember that. He just looked at me and smiled, a baby wouldn't understand anything I said anyway. Da da. He called out as his hands extended towards me, it brought a smile to my face. I looked towards the maid and she was standing over Gerald, trying to teach the annoyed kid about shapes that he wasn't getting right. Trey on the other hand just went back to playing with his toys, not caring about any of his brother's actions. Sigh, what am I gonna do with you all? I sighed, and as if on purpose, Oliver grabbed my hair. His grip was quite strong for a baby. Kids, I had opened orphanages around Bravos and other cities to care for the children. I also took a page off Vera's book and started training the smallest orphan boys and girls. I had ex-thieves train the children how to climb buildings. Some sailors and shipbuilders were brought to teach them how to get a profession or even fight in case they want to become guards. There was an unspoken deal with the orphans, that they must spy for me to repay them for taking them off the streets and raising them. Also, they would get rewarded if they got any important information. Places like Lorith, Pentos, Mir, Tyrosh, Lis, Volantis, Illyria, Tolos, Mirian, Yunkai, Astapor, Nugis and many more had orphanages sponsored by me. Bravus had 5 places like that. Every city that my ships went to trade had places like that, and the captains of my ships would bring news back to me. I could say that even Varys doesn't have as many spies as me. I had more wealth and resources than him dedicated to building my spy networks. When the time came when the new orphans grew into adulthood, my spy network would be the best in the world. While Varys was smart, he didn't have the modern knowledge I had for spy networks. As I played silly games with my kids and hearing them laugh made me happy too. But that moment was interrupted when a guard came in. "My lord, we have disposed of thee." He noticed my kids in the room and chose his words wisely. "Red trash." That meant that the guards had gotten rid of the dead body. Did it cause a stain on the floor? That was my only worry now. I didn't need to waste any thoughts to feel nervous about a dead enemy. "No, my lord," he answered and I waved him off. But as soon as he went away, another guard came in, and this time I recognized him as one of the people in charge of reporting important news to me. "My lord, it got tiring to hear people call me that. The informants have reported that the Myrish merchant, Odinos, has gone against you and started trading glass with Bravus directly, and even openly challenged you to beat him in trade." "Good, I will beat him in trade," I nodded. "After his corpse rests at the bottom of the sea he won't be able to trade, so it will end in my victory." After saying that I looked at the guard and the maid standing by the side and taking care of the kids. "You can both leave." They gave a slight bow and left the room. As soon as the door closed, a red hawk landed on my shoulder and I gave it a small cloth ball. It was concentrated salt, something made by magic, so even a grain would kill this man by making him overconsume salt, causing his kidneys to shut down. The gawk can enter his halls and quietly wait in the darkness till it's dinner time and then drop this silently after the food taster did his job. The good thing about this was that it didn't leave any traces of magic in it. The hawk flew off to do its job, without me needing to tell it anything. It already knew my orders due to the telepathic-like bond we share. While the spy network costs a lot to keep up, it already gave me useful information on my competitors and who needed to get their throats slit, or have a bird accidentally fly and knock over a vase from a roof, bringing it down in their heads, killing them. Magic was quite the neat trick if it was kept a secret. There wouldn't be a clue leading to me being involved with any of the murders either. Sometimes I even use hypnosis to control a drunk to kill someone for me. Though I couldn't control someone with a strong will or intelligence. So this method had become kinda outdated lately, it wasn't worth using. Too risky. What if there was another guy like me out there who only acted drunk? Though the spy network by itself wasn't perfect yet and there have been some hiccups. But one of them stood out the most, and that was Asai. The place didn't have any kids. So I had to send some adult spies to get me some reading material. I also killed the spies after they brought what I asked for. But the news that they brought was creepy. Everyone in Asai wore cloaks and masks. The books on the usage of magic were phenomenal though. And while there wasn't any magic that would allow someone to rule the world or allow someone to kill 100 people in one spell, much new magic became available and useful. Just watching the marvel of this supernatural phenomenon was amazing. For someone like me, magic was better than sex could ever be. Though I can't use magic too much or I will start losing lifespan, so that was a bummer. Bye-bye. I waved off to my kids and called some maids to take care of them. When I went to my office, a smile came to my face at the cleanliness of the place. Also, no blood had stuck to the floor, and neither did it smell like blood. Paying those maids so much was worth it after all. I saw the goblet of water on my desk and picked it up and threw the water in the air. But instead of falling, the water just stood there as if it was stuck in time. Simple tricks like this, something that wasn't even generally useful except to stop small amounts of water from falling on the floor, was amazing. I could spend all day just playing with this. But the biggest change now was that this wide knowledge of magic had given me the confidence to experiment with it a little. Everyone wanted to live forever, even those who didn't would want to live a little longer at the end of their lives. Sure, some might say that it would be devastating as one would have to handle losing people they love along the way. But most of them didn't understand that time heals everything. If someone dear to you died, then 4 years later that feeling would be dull till you no longer thought about them. Life always went on. But when the time came for me to try and become immortal, there was no perfect way. Even the undying ones have had their minds changed and morphed by drinking shade of the evening. That was no life, because if one wasn't oneself with all his memories and experiences in life, then what was the use for all of this? The blood raven had connected his body to tree roots. That was even a worse method than the undying ones. In the end, the solution I came to wasn't to zombify myself where I would lose my mind. Well, maybe I would do that later in life if there was no other chance. But my main spell was called Blood Descendant Body Resurrection. It was the reason I had started wanting to have more children, bastards and legitimate ones. Though this method was extremely risky, it was the only one where I would be able to keep my sanity and power at the same time. I also had the chance to grow stronger too. How this worked was that after my death, my Red Hawk familiar would come and touch my body, picking up my soul and then transferring it over to one of my blood descendants. Then I take control of their body, my thoughts and sense of self should stay the same. Ironically, changing bodies was the only way where I could be myself. My existence from now on will be like a snake eating its tail. I will be the head, while my sons will be the tail. To live on I had to continue with a form of self-cannibalism. This was sad. I loved my children, even if they were only born to become my future bodies. Well, it doesn't matter, they will live the best life they can, I guarantee it. I will try to hold on to this body for as long as I can before taking them over. Let them experience life fully, eventually, they would die anyway. Though this was all speculation and there had been 0 tests done on this spell, so I wasn't sure if it even worked. Plus there were many other risks too, for example, if my hawk got shot down while carrying my soul then I would die too. What if the body I went to was infertile? After all, the spell was intended for me to possess my descendants. So if the new body also became myself then would I only be able to possess the descendants that I will make with that body? Ugh. Just so many uncertain things. Why can't this world's magic be more certain and simple? Every spellbook that I read always had some parts that contradicted another book. There was no definition of a good way to use magic without hurting the user in some way. As night came around, my spy before dinner reports came in. A man dressed in rags walked into the office with no one bothering him. My lord, Westros doesn't seem to have anything too big going on. Also, the spider might be onto us. Getting any information out of King's Landing has become impossible. Did Varys find out we were the ones behind the spies? I asked while shuffling through some letters. Did he capture any of our guys? A couple of the child spies have been drowned under suspicious circumstances. Well, that wasn't surprising. After all the bald eunuch did cut off children's tongues, I wouldn't put it past him to kill a couple of kids. But don't worry, neither the young nor older spies in Westeros know who the real ringleader is. So even under torture, they won't say anything about us. Okay, then stop trying to put spies in King's Landing for the moment. No need to send our informants to the chopping block. That bald bastard was good at this. While I had been able to play on equal footing with him and even surpass him in some places due to the huge amount of money I put in the network. But in King's Landing, no matter what, no spy of mine has been able to live past a week in there. What other news is there? A tourney has been organized in Harrenhal, he reported, and I could sense that he was uncertain about something. Also, rumors say that the First Prince is planning to use the gathering as a meeting of lords and organize a takeover. After all, the owners of Harrenhal couldn't afford this tourney. Well, it seemed like Robert's rebellion was about to start soon. Now is my chance. Don't forget to leave a review. Chapter 14, Back to Westeros. Arthur. After a long and daunting journey, the kind that reminded me why medieval times were so bad. But finally, I arrived at my destination, Harrenhal. The ancient castle still stood up there like a daunting fortress. It was quite an amazing build, and as an engineer in my past life, I wonder just how much manpower and time it took to build such a monstrous castle. Sir, where should we set the tent? One of the 20 men I had brought with me for the journey asked. They were here for my security and just in case I needed a meat shield against arrows. Thankfully we hadn't been attacked at all during the journey here. We were in horses and fully armored too, so any bandits that wanted anything to do with us would know that we were trouble. Usually, armored men on horses meant that they belonged to some lord or another, plus the House Frey flag on the chest of my armor said just that too. Bandits might be stupid, but they knew that if they went after noblemen they would be eliminated, and someone like Valder Frey would even lunch their families just to send a message. Even before we entered the territory of Harrenhal we could see the hundreds of tents put up by the different families who came here for the tourney. Make a tent on the outskirts, but keep all of our things packaged and always make sure to feed the horses well, I ordered the man, who knew when this place could turn into a bloodbath and we needed to run. It was better to be prepared than to hope that the Mad King doesn't act mad. We entered the perimeter the guards patrolled. One of them saw us and I nodded at them. They nodded back and didn't stop us. When I got closer, it was even more cramped than it felt from far away. All around Harrenhal, I saw a lot of tents with different banners of all the houses of Westeros from the north to Dorne. All of the noble houses were here. Blacksmiths had opened small workshops and people rode on horses too, almost trampling others if the ones without horses weren't careful. A man's life here was cheap. Even if a nobleman killed someone, they wouldn't get punished. Even in the Vale it was the same, and then was the place where chivalry was practiced the most. Far away, thanks to my hawk eyes, I noticed a Frey tent and told the rest of my men. Go and help build the tent. I will be okay by myself from here on. When I rode to the Frey tent, I saw someone stand outside as a guard. It was a high chance that the weasel-looking guy was my sibling, and with his crooked teeth, he had that ugly Frey appearance. This was a reminder that even with my average looks, I was considered good-looking in that family. "Hello there, brother," I smiled at the guard and stepped down from my horse with a smile. "How have you been?" "Who the fuck are you?" he asked crudely. There were bad intentions in his eyes as he then caught sight of the Frey banner on my chest. His gaze turned suspicious at that. "I haven't seen you around here. You don't even remember your brother, halfwit," I said to him jokingly, but if I was being honest, I didn't remember him either as it had been around 5 years since I left home at 16. "Wah. He stopped and seemed to think for a bit and then realization slowly dawned in his eyes. "Oh shit, it's you, Arthur. I thought you went and died on a ditch somewhere. Where have you been? Do you remember me? I am Yellow Valder. Why do they call him that? Because of his yellow teeth. But no, I don't remember him at all. Though I used to teach each of my younger brothers how to use a sword. Yes, I remember you. How are you with a sword now?" "Ha," he smiled. "I can beat everyone else now, though Steveron and Black still hoop my arse every now and then." We shook hands and hugged each other. His name still didn't ring any bells, but I kept acting familiar with him and even put my hand around his shoulder and asked a very generic question. "So, how are things with that girl?" "Which girl?" He seemed genuinely confused, but I didn't let him think too much about it and continued. "You know the one, don't act all innocent now." I elbowed him lightly to the side with a mischievous smirk. "You think I didn't notice it back then?" That was when his gaze turned sour and he looked at the ground. "Ah, so you knew about Jamia. Well, father ended up marrying her." I just hit a weak spot right there. I will keep this in mind just in case I could use it later. But still, I didn't have time to talk with him all day, so I put a hand on his shoulder and looked at him with a sincere look. "Never forget that I am still your brother, so if you need anything just tell me." He nodded soberly and I gave him a gold dragon and winked. I am sure some lonely lady of the night out there could use the company. They don't usually get any during the day. He smiled happily and ran off. "Thanks, brother, I will never forget what you have done for me today." I only waved at him and didn't mention anything about how he just abandoned his guard duty and how father would punish him for this later. Opening the tent flap, I saw my father, Valder Frey, sitting on a high wooden chair. There were young men in their 20s talking to him and many among them I didn't recognize. Though, probably most of, if not all of them were my siblings. At first, they turned towards the newcomer and saw who entered the room. None of the people recognized me at first, after all, the slightly long hair didn't do me any favors. Back then I always had short hair and was smaller. Valder looked at me intently, more so than the others, and squinted his eyes. There was a trace of recognition in my father's eyes and he smirked amusingly. It seemed like he had figured out who I was. But the same couldn't be said about my siblings, who even after seeing the banner on my chest piece, didn't diminish their suspicions. "Sire," one of my siblings stepped forward and pulled out his sword. "We can see that you are a Frey bannerman, so you must present yourself in front of Lord Valder Frey." I looked at the idiot who talked and he had the same weasel-like appearance that most of the Freys had. Who pulled a sword out so casually? Weapons made people nervous, and pulling one out without the intention to use it could end up with your throat slit. To prove that, I pulled out a pouch of coins the size of my head and threw it on the ground before the guy could react. Gold coins spilled out on the ground, taking everyone's attention. Except for Valder Frey, my father, and the man who will probably die after eating his son's flesh ground it into a pie. "Last I heard you went to Essos," said Valder, taking a glance at the stack of coins too. He couldn't help himself. "Did you make some money there too?" "How? Your own sellsword company." Well, he was horribly wrong on that. But I won't ramble on uselessly here to try and change his mind. Only fools bragged about their accomplishments out loud. Like saying that you won the lottery, that's asking for disaster to happen to you. "Yeah, something like that," I agreed with him, content with his assumption. Valder Frey didn't have a spy network, he wouldn't know of what I did. Rumors also weren't trustworthy. Because going by rumors, Joffrey was a wise and gentle kind. With that said, I walked towards my father and sat in front of him while my siblings stared at the small fortune that I had thrown in the ground. "So, how are things going nowadays?" I asked Valder with a trace of a smile on my face. "Did you get a new wife?" "Keek keek," Valder cackled. He didn't even bother answering me and asked questions again. "So you finally decided to show your face? Where the hell have you been all this time?" "Oh, you know, here and there, nowhere too important," I said vaguely. Deciding to not mention the small case of Monopoly I was making on the other side of the sea. I heard a big tourney was coming up, and you know me, that was a temptation that was impossible to resist. After that, my lies flew out like water, building a background and adventures that I hadn't been to at all. Entering into a death competition in Essos was different from the tourneys here. I wasn't stupid enough to risk my life out there. Fighting for your life wasn't a smart way to earn money. It might seem like you would get a big sum of money initially. But that would be a waste of my time. The real money came from the monopoly I had built. Something that was unfamiliar in this world, and there were no rules against it. My ships were all positioned into strategic locations. Essentially it was a chokehold into the trade. And when one had a monopoly, they could price their goods whatever they wanted and people would buy. Why? Because there was no other place to get them and no one else would be able to provide such products. Well, they could, but they might find themselves dead like many others who had crossed me have ended up. Also, I was mostly dealing with medicine, spices, and other everyday things that were essential to life. I got the idea from the college debt in America, so I tried to monopolize something essential. Just like how colleges raise their tuition, I could continue raising my price as much as I wanted. Why? Because things like medicine and education were something essential that people would pay any amount to get. At least medicine in this time, as now education wasn't something they cared about. After some time talking with Valder, he in the end just cackled and said, "Well, you have made some money for yourself, so that's good. Also, welcome back, son." I only smiled contentedly. Who would need the welcome of a father like him? If it had been profitable, he would have been the first guy to be killed by me here. He was a shitty father all around. I knew what he did with some of his daughters behind the scenes. Now, this was the medieval world, so no one cared. And I wasn't any different. I wouldn't fight with Valder for something that didn't affect me. After that, we talked some more. It was mostly just Valder Frey who kept throwing shots at me and trying to play some power plays. But I just acted dumb like I didn't understand them. Playing dumb can turn a power play on its head. When someone has to explain exactly how they are threatening you, it becomes either laughable or plain evil, both of which are more easily resisted. Anyway, Valder didn't go into the evil way on how I got so much coin on me. That was what I wanted them to concentrate on, the coin and nothing more. With that done, I got up and he asked me, "Where are you going?" "To register for the tourney," I said, and walked out of the tent, waving at my siblings. Some eavesdropped back, some didn't. Maybe I should get rid of them all and get myself the twins. I had the means to do that now. No, that would be too suspicious and invite needless trouble. Especially during the war, if Valder picked the wrong side, he would be done. Also, escape from this place was virtually impossible in case the enemy was close. Going outside of the tent, I breathed in the fresh air, which mostly smelled of fire, meat, or generally shit. Didn't these soldiers have a procedure where to defecate? Because if they didn't, then that would be bad. Disease could run rampant. Well, it wasn't my problem. Plus, some people dying here would only be beneficial to me in the long run. I walked towards Harrenhal Castle, where the person who registers people should be. What was that? From the corner of my eye, I saw a child looking at me intently, even though he seemed like a beggar. Well, it appears that some people had me on their radar now. Was it one of Varys' little birds? Probably. Well, the spy will probably get bored looking at me after a while. What many people misunderstood was that these spies were human too, and if you didn't do anything or just stood around for a while, they would get bored eventually. Once people understood this, they would know that a spy network wasn't something that made you all-knowing. Also, spies have greed, lust, envy, and all the other normal characteristics that define humans. So that can be taken advantage of, and turn them to my side. Sadly, most of them just became double agents against me, so I had to kill them. They thought they would be smart getting paid from both sides, but every man with a brain knew that spies could turn double agents at any time. That was why I had my families within my grasp, just in case they do something stupid. Still, though, I acted like I didn't notice the spy looking at me and just kept walking. Maybe I should send a couple of my soldiers to kill that kid. Letting Varys to his schemes uninterrupted wasn't a good idea. Who knew what he might come up with? Walking towards the castle, I stumbled upon a merchant, one that had a slight accent. Unlike with the child spy, I stopped here and stared straight at him. "Sir, do you want some armor?" I heard a merchant talk to a novice knight. Fights always depend on armor and a good sword. How could you display your skills without the best armor and weapon? You are putting yourself in. That was when the merchant looked at me and noticed I was staring at him. Immediately he dropped the weapon he was trying to sell on the ground and he stumbled in fear. "You okay?" asked the knight, and the merchant smiled professionally and went back to doing his trade. As expected, the Iron Bank also sent their spies. But I was feared in Bravus, so any spy would just stumble away in fear as soon as our eyes met. They knew the horrible tales about me. I won't kill just him, his family will be on the table too. Many men can risk their lives recklessly, but not their families' lives. That was something no man would risk. Even though I had an alliance with them, I was still expecting the Iron Bank to send some faceless men against me and try to take control of my monopoly or copy the methods and principles behind it. I welcome them to try. With that thought in mind, I continued going towards Harrenhal and searched for the tourney registration. I registered in the archery competition and the melee. After I took care of my registration, I went to the Starks' tent. It didn't have any guards outside as no one would dare attack the Starks. Or maybe the Starks were naive enough to believe that people would fight with honor. Well, it didn't matter to me, and I won't be getting into a confrontation with them about this. When I went inside I saw a young girl who I assume was Lyanna Stark. She seemed to be nursing a young man. Then I noticed the big guy in the room, he was probably Brandon Stark, then there was the kid teen, I assumed he was Benyon Stark, and finally there was the only guy in this tent who I knew. Eddard Stark. Well, if this isn't the wolf pack altogether, I said in a villain's voice. They turned and looked at me. Ned immediately covered his face and sighed when he saw me. Like he had a memory he wanted to repress, yet, I knew a lot of things he did in the Vale that his family didn't want him to know. Brandon Stark looked at me with a hard face like it was carved in stone and he asked. Who are you? I turned towards Ned. Hakeman now Ned, you couldn't have forgotten this face now could you? Ned just looked at me, I could see that he knew who I was. His twitching lip also showed that he was holding back a chuckle. I am truly sorry, but, have we met before? I then make a face like I ate a sour lemon and say. It's me, Arthur Frey. Then his eyes brightened a little. Oh. I remember you. Ned sucked at lying. Also, he acted like he didn't know me? Well. How have you been, Arthur? He inquired and did some hand signs, meaning to tell me something. Sorry Ned, but our friendship isn't good enough for me to know whatever the hell you mean. Well, pretty good. I traveled all over Essos from Bravos and all the way to Asai. That was a lie. I was way too paranoid to travel like that. I loved my life way more than adventuring. Then immediately I started joking around with Ned. So how is Betty? Bessie? What was her name? Cough. Ned did a fake cough and shook his head with eyes filled with despair. I shrugged back. Again, sorry Ned, even if I know what you mean, in reality, I will act like I don't know what you mean. And I was better at lying than him. So I was about to make up a lot of stuff and tell it to his family. Bessie? Lyanna inquired, looking at her brother and then at me. A mischievous look adorned her face. Brandon smiled too. Oh, seems like my brother wasn't as good of a boy as I thought. Well, time to start getting to know the soon-to-be-dead Starks. After separating from Ned and his family after half an hour and Ned having to do a lot of explaining. Right now he might curse at me, but after this, these memories will become things that he will remember his family by. Dinner came by and a feast was prepared for all the lords that had come here. I too sat at the table where the lords of the Riverlands discussed different things. I mostly kept to myself, they don't have anything useful for me. Instead, I secretly observed the 16-year-old Lyanna Stark. Even though almost every important lord from the Seven Kingdoms was here, she was the one who would play the most important role in this part of history. Then I hope your night will become more enjoyable with my music. Suddenly a soft-spoken man said, though his voice was low, everyone in the feast heard him. I look at the man. He was on the inside balcony where the singers were. Then he started singing some sad music. It was pretty good, for a medieval barbarian prince like him anyway. Lyanna even started crying at the music. Benyon laughed at her, then she took a cup of wine and poured it into his head. Robert Baratheon was dancing around and acting like a fool. I also saw Rhaegar secretly glancing at Lyanna. Okay, so he already had his eyes on her. I knew how this would end. He will easily manipulate the dumb Lyanna and then put a child in her. Then do a classic Targaryen madness turn and make it seem like he kidnapped her. Then they will be in so-called love tragedy, a dumb and naive 16-year-old kid and a 20-year-old man. These gross barbarians knew how to fuck things up, don't they? I mean, in their unintelligent minds, how did they think their so-called love was going to end? Did they think it would be like the stories where the prince took the princess away from an arranged marriage and they live happily ever after? Well, obviously with her brother and father being massacred. I wonder what expression she will have on her face when she understands that her actions did that to her family. God, just trying to comprehend what they were thinking makes me feel stupider. Madness and naivety, not a good combination. Well, enough about that dumb stuff like that, it will just make me angry at other people's actions. My eyes wandered and I noticed a woman dancing with Baristan Selmy. She was a young, beautiful, tall, and fair woman, with haunting violet eyes. Her long dark hair tumbled around her shoulders. I just found something that might calm me down a little. Chapter 15, Ashura Dane. Arthur. I stared at a woman dancing with Baristan Selmy. She was young, beautiful, tall, and a fair woman with haunting violet eyes. Her long dark hair tumbled around her shoulders. A beauty like no other, she probably broke many people's hearts today. Ashura Dane. Could I seduce and fuck her tonight? Probably 100 guys had tried by now. Handsome, muscular, tall, strong, thin, short, ugly, All of these kinds of people she had probably met and already gotten bored of. Everyone most likely talked to her politely and tried to get into her good side by showing how honorable, cavernous, and nice they were. Of course, those were all acts. People, in reality, weren't like that, and the nicest person had a dark side too. As soon as Baristan Selmi finished dancing with her and got a refusal, I went in and smiled at her. "Care for a dance, my lady?" She put on a fake smile, no longer even bothering to hide just how tired of this she was. "Of course. Sir." But she politely accepted. "My name won't matter tonight." I grabbed her hand and we started dancing. I could feel the gazes at us. Was this how she felt constantly? No wonder she is tired and bored of these people. "Oh, is that so?" She seemed surprised by my answer. "Then what's your plan for tonight, my nameless knight?" "Well," I smirked and said jokingly, "I am going to get you drunk as the seven hells and then have my way with you." She frowned, but I noticed the small twitch of her lip. This was probably the only entertaining thing she had heard tonight. "That was very impolite and not knight-like of you." Oh, I had a mock surprised look on my face. Then should I lie like the others? My eyes then wandered towards her dress. "I will also take your dress after having my way with you. It looks expensive, and since you wore it some perverted noble lord would pay a hefty sum for it." She looked at the ground to hide her face from me, but I noticed her voluptuous chest shaking. So she was trying to hold in her laughter. After a couple of seconds later, she looked back up and stared into my eyes. "That was very unfunny of you, sir. Please be more of a respectful gentleman towards ladies. Saying such crude things is very untasteful." Though she said that, I could see the amusement in her eyes that she couldn't hide. "So how long would you like to dance? I am sure some other chivalrous knight would like to dance with you." I got closer to her and whispered. By chivalrous I mean boring and probably very old. As I pulled back, she only smiled at me politely. "I wouldn't mind a couple more dances with you, my mysterious knight." She was trying so hard to seem ladylike that if it wasn't for her appearance she would be the dullest and most boring woman here. Thankfully, those good looks of hers are something special. "Well, you have to loosen up a bit, my lady. Or I might just find you boring during our dances after your charm wears off. Also, I am very close to being bored, so tell me something interesting about yourself." Now I had to speedrun a date here and try to get her to tell me something real about herself. Because I wasn't willing to waste too much time and court her the usual way. Unlike most people here, I wasn't looking to marry her, just get a quick lay. "How about my brother?" she asked. "He is Arthur Dane, the greatest swordsman in the world." Well, the world was a big place, so that was doubtful. Also was the most interesting thing about her being the sister of Arthur Dane. Damn, she was lucky she had beauty because she was one very boring girl. Also, the main reason I didn't tell her my name was her brother. Because it was the same as her brother's and that would immediately put me in the no-smashing zone. Having a lover with the same name as a family member just made the situation very weird. "Arthur? Oh, I know of him," I smiled. "Wasn't he the guy who beat his sword instructor the first time he picked a sword?" "No, that's the other Arthur," she frowned, seemingly offended. "You are annoying." Well, annoyance is better than boredom because without having the latter it meant that I still had a shot. "So? Do you want me to lie and say that I and your brother are as tight as thieves and we swallow each other's swords?" "What?" she said, exasperated by my behavior. "No, it just makes me feel like you might be stupid for not knowing who Arthur Dane is." "Well, honestly, I didn't even know who you were till a couple of minutes before. You and your brother just weren't the center of my life, so why the hell would I know about him?" I had intentionally started a small argument and I could tell that she wanted to win it. But she couldn't see that this was my intention. The more she wanted to argue, the more her ladylike behavior would slip and she might start saying something real beyond her act. She was very determined to win the argument, so she won't leave either. I loved headstrong people, the ones like Ashura Dane were just too proud and easy to trick. By now, I knew she won't leave my side for the rest of the fear. I was more patient and calm-headed than her, so she won't be able to win an argument over me. "You should know him, it's basic knowledge in Westros," she whispered harshly, her eyes no longer holding a trace of amusement and she was righteously furious. "So? What if I am not from Westros? Your view of the world is narrow, little lady. And honestly, kinda boring." I shrugged, my eyes wandering toward the other ladies in the room. "Little lady? Boring." Ashura's whispers were loud enough to be heard by those around us, but she no longer seemed to care. "You damn cretin! You know nothing about me." "Cretin? Is that even a word?" "I might be from Essos, so I don't know that word," I said nonchalantly. This enraged her even more. Which was good, since angry people always would say more things than they intended. She huffed. You are so irritating." I chuckled at her behavior and suddenly realization dawned on her. "Wait, don't tell me you were just messing around." "Ha ha ha, I smiled softly, leaning my head on her shoulder as we danced, trying to keep in my laughter. It wasn't that entertaining, but I was playing a character here that I had to keep up. That was so funny, getting angry over nothing. You looked like a kitten whose tail was stepped on. She stepped on my foot in anger, making it seem accidental, but the vengeful smile on her said otherwise. Oh, is that so entertaining to you? I chuckled. Yes, very, and then winced as she kept stepping on my foot. Well, it didn't hurt as I had steel coverings on my shoes. But he didn't need to know that. Ashura needed to win sometimes too, or she might become too angry and leave for real. Hey, now. That's not very ladylike of you. She smirked mischievously. I will show you ladylike. By now the whole room had noticed that there was something between me and Ashura. Though she was so entwined in her world that she didn't even seem to care about any of that. The only thing she was worried about now was getting back at me. Ned Stark. While I had been nervous at the beginning of the dance with Ashura Dane, my hands were shaking even after the dance. I think the dance went well, I didn't step on her toes or anything like that, and she even smiled while I told her about my life. If I had embarrassed myself, I would have buried my head on the ground. I felt like we connected by talking about our strong older siblings and the mischiefs of the younger ones. I was drinking some wine and thinking about the dance when my older brother sat next to me with his cup of wine in his hands. How did it go, Ned? Did my little brother get charmed by a lady? The lady that I had to ask to dance with you. I look at my brother Brandon, he has a knowing smirk on his face. Why yet? I tried to say it casually but still stuttered. Brandon was about to say something when he suddenly frowned and pointed with his head towards the dancing floor. Though it seems like you have some competition. I saw Ashura now dancing with someone else. Now I wouldn't mind that, after all, every man here was enamored by her and had asked for a dance. But I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces once I looked at her face. When we were dancing her smiles were pretty and polite, and just now I realized that they were fake. She was doing what was expected of her and being polite. Because now Ashura was genuinely laughing and putting her head on her current dance partner's shoulder just to hide her laughter. I felt like an outsider just looking at them. Her current dancing partner is Arthur Frey, also known as the Undefeated Knight. They say that he was never defeated ever since he picked up a sword. I heard that even the first time he picked up a sword he beat his master at arms in just 4 blows. Brandon informed me, though I knew all of that already. Then again, you probably know this better than me, Ned. Arthur then whispered something in Ashura's ear and she nodded towards him enthusiastically. I can't stop a frown from appearing on my face when I saw her kiss his neck secretly. By now neither of them were bothered that others had noticed their showing of affection. For Ashura, an unwed maiden, this was scandalous. I know him, he is my friend, he is an acquaintance of mine, I said, knowing that Brandon understood that I and Arthur were friends. Our talk in the Stark tent had shown that he knew a lot about me and we seemed like friends. My brother sighed as he looked at my face. I must have shown a pathetic look because he seemed to try and cheer me up. Here, get some wine in your belly and you will feel better. I also have fallen in love 100 times, and by the next day, after fucking them, well, you know how the story goes. This is different. I yelled at my brother without even meaning to. It's just that my heart feels clouded and confused. I didn't know what to do. Big words for a small puppy, the prissy southern lords sure taught you some fancy words. Brandon wasn't having any of it either and put a bottle of wine in my hand. Get a little drunk first, then we will talk again later. Then immediately I had to stop myself from getting up in anger. That was when I saw Arthur and Ashura sneak out of the party, holding each other's hands with smiles on their faces. Chapter 16, Ashura Dane 2. Arthur. I grabbed Ashura by the hand and we tried to stealthily go outside. But taking a girl like Ashura away is bound to be noticed. But the other lords were in no place to intervene, so they didn't. Seeing the looks people were sending us, I jokingly whispered to her. Come on now my lady, we get away from here. I will take you to a tower to protect you from all the evil lords. She just smiled at me. Damn, she even has perfect white teeth. Giggle. Well, maybe you are the evil knight who kidnaps me. While smiling at her I put my hand over her shoulders and slightly groped her left breast while we strode towards one of the empty towers. Well then, if I am the evil knight, then you must be the princess who falls in love with me. Ashura chuckled but didn't say anything. She couldn't help herself, this was probably the first and last time in her life she would ever get so close to an adventure. As we were climbing the stairs of the tower she suddenly stopped and looked at me. I saw her blue eyes now had uncertainty in them. Should we? It's your choice, we only live once, I reassured her, but it wasn't a reassurance. Because saying that we only live once would make her anxious to try new things. In my last life, this would be called socially pressuring someone into doing something. Try drugs, because you only live once. Do you want to die without ever knowing what being high feels like? The number of times I had heard something like that push even the nicest and naive people over the edge. I was 90% sure Ashura wouldn't refuse this. After all, she only lives once. Does she want to die as just being the wife of some old lord that only cares about her appearance? Or would she live her life a little before that? She kept looking at me and we leaned closer to each other, and our lips touched. Maybe I want to live. Ashura whispered. With someone like you. Yeah, sorry lady, but you are the kind of girl that gets pumped and dumped. There was no way I would want to be with a naive woman like you. We have only known each other for less than an hour. Also your family isn't powerful enough to offer, so there would be no benefits. One shouldn't mix business with pleasure. Also, I had a lot of secrets that she would not like. For example, I already had kids of my own. What Ashura and I had was puppy love, which seemed too good to be true. And it was because after tonight I don't think we will ever see each other anymore. But those things should be forgotten for tonight, and I wasn't going to refute her words and ruin the mood. Instead, I took the initiative and started using some tongues in our session. After a little kissing, we separated and gazed into each other's eyes. The love and lust in her were clear as day. But Ashura seemed unsure of what to do next. She was uncertain how situations like this could develop. So I just took the lead and kissed her once more. When we separated this time for some breath, I took her hand and led the naive lady to the top of the tower. Through it all, Ashura was quiet and just stared at me with a smile on her face. Even when we arrived at the top, she just leaned on the edge of the tower and grinned at me. What's wrong? I asked her. She just looks unsure at something. But in the end, she just shook her head and leaned forward, kissing me aggressively. It was the first time she took charge tonight, and I welcomed it. Her hand even slipped towards a bulge in my pants. Sex scene. I was mere inches from an incredibly beautiful woman, and it wasn't strange that I had been hard already. The glint in Ashura's eyes even showed that she was pleased. I couldn't help it as my heart was pounding pretty hard as her fingers delicately slid along my cheek. We separated our kiss and her lips were close enough that I could feel her breath. I like this aggressive side of you. Taking your life in your own hands. She was manipulated into her current decisions, but she didn't know that. Her lips curl up in a lopsided grin. That's true, she says, fingertips sliding along my lips. The movement was intimate, unique, and she seems to like my response. Her smile only grew broader. We should have some real fun together. I smiled at her. Now she started acting however she wanted. She was high on her freedom right now. Well, how do you want to play this? I asked her, already knowing her answer. She lets out a soft laugh at that, her finger trailing down my chest towards my groin, quietly popping the button as she stares me in the eye, pulling out my shaft in a slow, teasing movement. I put my hands on her shoulder and started undressing her. She was hot, a beautiful face, framed by wavy, dark hair, and an incredible physique, lithe and flexible. Her haunting purple eyes only added to her charm. I took off a cloth that acted as her bra and tore her panties aside. I was interrupted from admiring her body as she started to caress my shaft and I let out a soft groan in response. She smiled, or rather, her existing smile grew even broader, showing her ivory white teeth. This is nice, she said, as she strokes and caresses my length, putting it between her thighs but not quite in yet. Her tongue runs across my upper lip, and she fishes it out in short order, my hard cock pointing straight at her. The expression she wore as she looked at my shaft appeared was absolutely sexy. Her eyes widened in surprise, her eyebrows going up, and then she curled her lips back into a confident smile. Very nice, she said as she started to stroke it faster. I grab her in a quick motion and pull her down to the ground with me. I was laying in the back and she was sitting on top of me. Her body glistered due to the moon. The beauty radiated even more by her smile as her chest moved up and down as she breathed heavier. Swallowing as she shifts her weight, teasing my cockhead against her sex. I can feel her warmth against me, soft lips caressing my tip, and my fingers ball up into fists on either side of me. She smiled confidently, her uncertainty all gone now. Then she begins her descent. Soft inner walls caress every inch of my cockhead, her wetness caressing and coating my dick as she slides down my length. She twisted her hips, left and right, undulating her body with perfect form, a smile on her lips as I groaned in response to the feeling, my hips bucking up towards her, several inches getting swallowed in a moment. She doesn't complain, just letting out a soft breath herself. Even though I could tell by the look on her face that this wasn't easy on her. Ashura's hands reached for my chest, pressing against my stomach and slowly sliding up my shirt. You look good, she breathes out, licking her lips, clearly enticed by my bare chest. MMMN, she groaned, as she took me fully to the base, her head casting back, a soft throaty noise escaping her throat. My hand slowly slid up her thigh while the other groped her hanging breasts. Her body was surprisingly tense as she gently started to move up my cock again. Before my fingers arrived at her clit, teasing and brushing at it. She moaned gently at that, her eyes fluttering as she looked at me. You like that? I asked her sensually, as she got down and stared me in the eye. I do, she practically purred, her movements continuing on my cock, projecting easy confidence as she slid up and down. The movements were a slow curling one that twisted my cock around inside her. Her hands continued to run along my chest, her breasts bouncing in a strangely eye-catching way. They're not the biggest pair, certainly, but they're quite a bit more impressive than most of the ones I had seen, and the first to belong to a woman bouncing on my dick. I got my other hand away from her clit and grabbed both of her breasts. I could feel it, the softness, just the right size to cup my hand around. She smiled down at me, enjoying my touch, my expression, or at the very least something I was doing, and she started to move faster on my cock. "Do that again with your thumb," she whispers down at me, and it took a moment for me to realize her meaning, shifting my hand on her groin so my fingers teased at her taut stomach and my thumb could play with her clit. I lose all track of time, distracted by the movements of the beautiful woman in my lap. She squeezed her insides around my dick intermittently, adding a unique flavor to impassioned pumping, and eventually she leaned down over me, meeting me in a kiss. Her pace has long since passed sensual and moved on to manic, as she slobbered and drools into my mouth. With one hand, I reach for her ass, squeezing the supple thing, enjoying the way it hardly reacted at all, and that provokes a soft hum of approval from her. So I started to run my hand all along her back, fingertips brushing slowly up her spine as she kept pumping her cunt up and down, slurping and sucking and drooling into my mouth. I rub and tease at her clit, and she orgasmed before I did. Her sex squeezing and milking at my cock hard as she shuddered and moaned atop me, breasts pressing against my chest. I come too, naturally. I may have some experience, but girls like these were always too enticing. I just splattered her insides with one of the thickest loads I had ever let out. She groaned in my mouth as she felt my hot seed fill her insides. I sighed as I found release, collapsing utterly in the aftermath, and she quietly rolled off me, rising to her feet. But she buckled and just laid next to me on the cold floor. "That was top tier for a first go," I complimented her. "You knew?" she asked. "Yeah, I could guess. You were too tight and inexperienced." I smiled, caressing her face gently. "Though you probably tried something with another girl, right?" She blushed in embarrassment and didn't look me in the eyes anymore. "Seems like I was a bullseye on that one." Getting up, I positioned myself behind her and asked. "Ready for round 2? "What?" She looked at me with confusion, until I slid my shaft straight into her sex that was still dripping with my juices. Her eyes widened and a loud moan of pleasure left her throat. 4 hours we did it like rabbits. When she got tired, we would rest, when I got tired she would re-energize me. For one night, we were each other's company. I don't know how long we were up there in the tower, but by the time we came back down, the feast was already over, and only drunk sleeping people were around. We separated there and she went to her room that she shared with Elia Martel. I to my tent. It was a good night overall. When the next day came about, I lazily was woken up by the sounds of horses galloping about and people talking. "Leon!" I called out for my healer and immediately I heard rushing steps. "Sir," Leon came into the tent and looked at me seriously. "You won't believe what happened yesterday." Even the Mad King appeared. I somewhat remembered what had happened from the books. But I was curious if anything had changed. "Tell me a general summary of what happened," I told him, going to the corner and picking up a certain kind of stick that was used to clean the teeth nowadays. "Jaime Lannister has become a Kingsguard," he then looked around and got close to me, silently whispering. "Also the Mad King's appearance is, as they say, long nails, unwashed hair. He looked more like a beggar than a king. If he didn't have the crown on his head, everyone would assume he had drunkenly stumbled in the feast." Well, I was glad I hadn't been there last night to see such a gross sight. Instead, I was doing something more fun. "Also, Lord, the melee event for the tourney will start soon," he reminded me. I nodded and waved him off. It seemed like there wasn't anything that had changed too much. At least the big events hadn't changed that much. Like the Mad King making Jaime a Kingsguard. He will regret that later. Putting on my well-woven armor, with the Red Hawk engraved on it. I also put some hidden knives and certain potions on my pouch. I was ready for the melee and set off. My guards were around me like usual, and even Leon had come this time. Just in case of an accident, he will always be there to make sure I didn't die due to some infected cut. Once we arrived at the tourney grounds, the guard nodded at me. "Arthur Redhawk, you are on the list." I didn't even need to tell him my name. Maybe fucking Ashura Dane brought about a lot more clout than I had initially thought. After all, I wasn't known for much on this side of the sea. Entering the stage, the place was big and full of knights in armor. Some wore light armor, some heavy, and there were ones who even wore just plain leather armor. As expected, most were using swords. So there wasn't anything strange about it. But amongst the midst of that, one man stood out. He had silver-colored glittering armor with the Targaryen dragon engraved on his chest plate. The man was looking straight at me. "Oh. I know who he is. Shit, that Arthur Dane, also known as the best swordsman in the realm. Due to my good eyesight, I could tell that he was frowning. Yet, there was another fact that he wasn't that well known about, that man was Ashura Dane's brother. The same girl I had fucked all night. I hope he doesn't know what happened between me and Ashura. Or at least believed that his sister was a good girl and wouldn't do something vile. But my hopes were crushed when he noticed me looking back at him, and his frown turned into a look of hatred. Well, he knows what happened yesterday night. This was going to be even harder than I thought. Chapter 17, Melee. Arthur. Arthur glared at me with a hateful look. Now that was unavoidable. If he knew what I and his sister did, then it wouldn't be surprising that he might even go for the kill here since I dishonored his sister. Now, this might seem kind of over the top in a modern world, but here it would bring shame to him if he didn't at least do that much. It would make it seem like someone could just go and fuck his sister and he wouldn't say anything about it. This world was ruled by fear, you wouldn't want anyone to start having any silly ideas. Though there was another big problem in the melee, there were 86 people participating in it. While the stadium was open and big, it didn't mean much, because if I stood out as weak, then I might get swarmed. If I stood out as too strong, I might get swarmed too since I would seem as too big of a threat to handle alone. I looked towards my healer. Give me the great sword. Yes, my lord, he obliged and handed it to me. It was a beautiful sword with a red hawk carved at the end of the handle. It wasn't Valyrian steel, but it was very well made and kept in perfect condition. This weapon was mostly to draw attention because if I was in a real pinch, I still had 2 daggers hidden under my armor in the lower back. Arthur's gaze didn't leave and he kept staring at me like a predator would his prey. Secretly, I took out a small vial of the potion and drank it. Even if someone noticed this, it wouldn't seem strange as it was just a fighter hydrating himself before a battle. Immediately I felt the potion travel through my veins like molten lava attacking my muscles. I immediately took a pill after that, which lessened the pain. This was a strength potion, it increased my physical strength by quite a lot. Initially, the potion would cut off a huge chunk of lifespan for an increase in physical strength. Essentially it was useless as it couldn't even be mass-produced and took too many precious ingredients to make. The lifespan drainage was taken care of by the pill I made myself. Still, it was a shame that the pill also weakened the strength potion's effects too, but it was better than being in pain while fighting and losing a chunk of my lifespan. Ugh! I winced and almost felt like throwing up. I took another pain-soothing potion and the excruciating pain disappeared. Now I was in perfect fighting form, and confident in beating Arthur. But the potion's effect will only last for half an hour and after that, I will be weakened for the next 3 days. So I had to finish this as fast as I could. Only I knew just how much of a lie the undefeated knight facade was. My natural fighting power at best was around that of a good king's guard, but nowhere near the likes of Barry Stan Selmy or Arthur Dane. This reputation was something I had planned to build ever since a young age. Even when I was a kid, I always chose to fight with the other squires when they were at their weakest, drunk. I even made the advantage myself by putting weakening and sleeping medicine in the food of anyone I wasn't certain of beating. It didn't take long for the others to get ready and the melee to begin. With this many people fighting, it was bound to be a bloodbath. Especially since we were using real weapons, after all, dull weapons were for children's training. As knights, they obviously knew when to not cut their enemy with their sword. Having them not use real swords would be an insult to them. At least that's what the knights believed here. I looked around, not many people were willing to pick me as their first opponent as I was still fresh and not tired. That reputation finally came to good use. My pupils dilated as adrenaline rushed through my body and I concentrated on one of the people closest to me. "Ah!" he yelled in panic and stumbled back. I used my great sword and tipped him by hitting his foot with the bling side. When he was about to get up, I just kicked him in the head with all my strength. The sound of his helmet meeting my steel boot rang out and he was knocked unconscious. I kept the great sword in my hand and pointed it around and looked out for anyone who might try and attack me. An armored knight came toward me, his movements were a bit sluggish and he had a normal sword. But I used the size and weight of my great sword to smash his sword aside, and hit him with a strike that caved in his helmet. Clang! He dropped to his knees and fell unconscious too, or he might have died as in that strike I didn't hold back at all. Having this enhanced strength was amazing because as long as I hit my enemy, techniques become useless and even detrimental. I just needed to bash at them, whether they tried to parry or block, it would be the same as they would stumble and give me an opening to beat them. No matter the hit, or where it landed it would incapacitate them. Since my hawk was sitting in one of the high trenches, it was looking straight at me and by sharing our vision I could see my back too. A sword came from behind me as an opponent thought they were being sneaky, but the attack failed as I swung backward and hit his neck, instantly dropping him to the ground dead. Oh well, accidents like this happen all the time and from his armor, he wasn't anyone too important. Yuah! 3 guys charged at me, and I pulled all of the strength I could muster into a 2-handed swing. The power behind my attack pushed the men back and knocked down 2 of them, the crowd went wild once they saw that. Whoa! That's the undefeated knight for you. Wait, so the rumors were true then? I charged on the one who was left standing, but an enemy swung at my midsection from behind me. I sucked low, dodged the swing, and punched the attacker in the face with an iron gauntlet. The man hadn't been wearing a helmet, so half of his teeth broke with that punch. I felt the crunch under my fist. By now, I was unbeatable by the rabble as they panicked when getting close, and it made them easier to put down. Also, looking at the sharp giant sword in my hand, scared some men as they didn't want to accidentally die during the competition. Seeing that not many were approaching me anymore, I looked around and smirked. "Come on, are you scared? Don't be, it will make me look bad if I don't fight more here." Though I said those words of provocation, I didn't want to fight anymore because while my strength was increased by the potion, my stamina stood the same. I was carrying a heavy great sword and heavy armor. I would get tired very fast if I moved recklessly. One of the younger men was brave enough to stand forward and try to fight me. He had leather gear and was very poor, as even his sword seemed to be second-hand. I will take your challenge, Sir Arthur." I looked at him like a hawk and my gaze sharpened. He flinched back fearfully. "Here I come," he stuttered fearfully. He was not experienced in real battle. Taking advantage of his inexperience, I charged at him and he instinctively stepped backward. I must make an example out of him, or else these fights will tire me out. By now anyone else would have been tired, but I wasn't. Though it wasn't long till I will be. My sword went toward his midsection. He tried to block poorly. Clang! Our swords clashed and mine broke straight through his, also getting straight through his arm and yet not stopping. The young man was bisected just right up from his belly button. I don't want to die. Mother! He cried out in fear as his body fell to the ground and his intestines spilled on the ground. Looking at me fearfully and tears in his eyes, the light drained from his eyes. The heavy smell of blood adorned the stage. The rest of the people who planned to fight me stepped away in fear. I had shown my monstrous strength now and they didn't want to fight me. As planned, the young man's death had pushed any competitors away from me. This was good, the other fighters wouldn't dare and try to fight against me. Still though, unlike I, other fighters fought against each other and even Arthur Dane was swarmed by a couple of people. If he defeated one, 2 others would take his place. Seems like he wasn't as aggressive as I had been and that was good for me. At the end of it, as expected, only Arthur Dane was left as one of my last opponents. He had taken care of any man who got too close to him. Sometimes he was swarmed by 2 or even 3 people at once, yet he had taken care of all of them. Fuck! Suddenly a yell brought my attention to another opponent who had survived in the field. It was Robert Baratheon. He had some shallow cuts all over his body and he seemed to be very tired. Unlike Arthur Dane, he couldn't block all of his opponent's attacks with his hammer. Amongst us, the one who was the least injured seemed to be Arthur Dane, that fucking monster. He had fought most people yet was able to come out unscathed. The only thing he seemed to show was that he was breathing heavily and seemed to be out of stamina. Even I had a light cut in my hand. Still, though, his ability to take on 3 opponents at once was remarkable. In the end, I had to admit, Arthur Dane was extremely talented, and with the 1,000 hours of training he had put on the sword, even his stamina wasn't that bad. Especially since in this world exercises to increase stamina were almost non-existent. I trained with modern exercises and yet, this guy's inefficient methods surpassed me. To me, it was a clear show of who amongst us trained the most. The only way this guy was probably even gaining stamina was to train a lot during the day, since he didn't know the basics of how to build cardio and muscle intensity. Though he was still tired, I could tell due to the movements of his throat as he seemed hungry for air. Normally no one would be able to notice that, but my hawk vision could be used in many ways other than just looking far away. Still, another problem had arisen. I only had around 10 minutes in my strength potion. I can't waste time like this. Taking a deep breath, I charged toward Arthur. Robert, like the predictable brute he was, wanted to join in and I stopped mid-charge, immediately changing direction and attacking Robert. Clang! He barely blocked my sword with his hammer and I could tell that he was tired too. It was only his sense of pride of wanting to win that was making him still stand up. Jumping back, he pulls back his hammer and his gaze wanders towards Lyanna for a split second, and from that Robert seems to gain a renewed vigor. Clang! His hammer hit my sword, and my weapon snapped in 2 like a twig due to the power exerted into it. Shit! I paid a lot for that sword, so I knew it was hard to break, but this just showed just how Robert's brute strength was commendable. Also, he seemed to want to show off in front of Lyanna. Still, though, I knew that my current strength should be somewhere around that of future Gregor Clegane, the Mountain. Yet, Robert still seemed to handle my attacks with moderate tiredness. I might lose against Robert as I had no weapon at hand. He swung his hammer at me, and it was only due to my good eyesight that I was able to lean back. I felt the wind of his afterblow came through the openings in my helmet. No, losing was unacceptable for my image. I had worked too hard for my title as the undefeated knight to lose it here. He seems like you don't have a weapon, Robert commented friendlily, though we were still fighting, it didn't mean that he doesn't consider me as his friend. Fuck. Can't you be an honorable cunt and let me pick a weapon from the ground? I joked back, trying to sound equally casual and as if I wasn't in a pinch. Nat, I wanna show my betrothed my warrior side. He seemed amused by the situation, as he kept swinging at me and I kept dodging. Due to his armor, I knew that punches wouldn't do any good and would just leave me open for a hammer to the ribs. Also, I heard you calling me a cunt. I am a little drunk, but not deaf. Bahaha. Well, ready to get beat again then? I said assertively. Seeing no other choice, I whispered under my breath. Athmovzar. My words came out like a snake crawling in my ear. Even I, as the user, got a chill down my spine. Even during all this, I kept eye contact with Robert. Hypnosis was easy to use when the target was drunk and the action ordered wasn't something unnatural, that he wouldn't do. Robert swung at me again. This swing to the outside eye would seem like one of his normal attacks. But I knew exactly where it would go, as I had hypnotized him to hit my left shoulder. He was attacking quite fast, for his hammer's weight. Just as his attack was about to land, I sidestep and his hammer hits the ground. I put my foot over the hammer and pulled out the knife I had hidden in the sheath on my lower back. Swish! Within an instant, my knife was pointed at the crack of his throat, the opening where his chest plate and helmet meet. Attacking my shoulder was a good idea in the eyes of anyone as it was a clear weak point. Sadly, the move kind of loses its effectiveness if one knew about it already. Any kind of move loses effectiveness if someone knew about it. Fuck, he swore, annoyed at this. I smirked at him and kept the knife in place even as he raised his arms in surrender. You owe me a good brothel whore, you cunt. Fuck you, he cursed at me again. But this time I could see the smile he tried to hide while taking off his helmet. But yet, I will pay for 5 of the best whores in the 7 kingdoms. Also, now I am a soon-to-be married man, so I can't be seen doing that anymore. At the same time, I kept an eye on Arthur Dane, but the man hadn't attacked while we were fighting. Well, don't worry, Robert. Think of this loss as losing to the best knight in the 7 kingdoms. I actually have quite a lot of money bet on him, so, we are good friends, but money is still money. He said jokingly and walked off. Wait, what? Pua ha ha ha. I can't hear you now due to the sound of the crowd. He definitely could hear me. But it seems like I should have bet on myself more. After all, I was going to win this match no matter what. Turning towards Arthur, I clenched the dagger in my hand tightly. The swords in the ground were all poorly made so they might shatter if they clashed with Dawn, the sword of House Dane. Better a reliable dagger than a shitty sword. Ready to fight. I smirked at him, changing the grasp on my knife into a reverse grip. Since Arthur had left the face part of his helmet open, I could drop my dagger as soon as the clash between our weapons happened and then punch him in the face. He only looked at me and then the dagger in my hand. He knew just how important it was to have well-made weapons and any properly made weapons wouldn't have been abandoned by the contestants and left in the ground. Sir Derry. Arthur called towards one of his fellow King's Guard. He was next to the Mad King who seemed to gleefully anticipate our battle. Give me a sword. The fellow King's Guard seemed to get the message and threw a sheathed sword on the melee grounds, just right between us. I want to beat you at your best, said Arthur, taking out his dual swords and getting ready for a fair fight. I nodded and went and took the sword, pulling it out of its sheath. It was quite amazing. Probably even better than my initial sword. Where did he even get this? It isn't Valyrian steel, but it was still quite good. The crowd goes into deafening cheers at his honor and sense of fairness. Amazing. As expected of Sir Arthur. Well, he is the most honorable knight in the kingdom. The yells of the people about his honor quilted down until they were but simple whispers. I nodded thankfully and got in a fighting stance. Since I fucked his sister, I didn't think he would still be honorable. Time to fight the best knight in the 7 kingdoms, Chapter 18, Arthur vs Arthur. As soon as I grabbed the sword, my grip on it tightened so hard that it would break the handle of most swords. But my eyes never left Arthur, as he slowly walked towards me with 2 swords in his hands. I knew that one mistake and I will be on the ground. As he got closer, I immediately took charge and attacked him, doing a wide slash. He jumped back just the right distance and charged at me. One of his swords made some scratches on my heavy armor, while the other only could bash against it, but did no damage. He frowned. Heavy armor? How the hell aren't you exhausted yet? Well, it was due to my strength potion who could handle armor at this size easily. After all, usually, the bigger the body, the more strength it has. But also, the market armor would be needed to cover that big body. I had the strength, but my body wasn't bigger. So heavy armor like this felt normal for someone like me. Well, maybe I train harder than you, I added jokingly. That was the logical explanation most would arrive at. I obviously wouldn't tell him about my magic. He didn't say anything and just got closer to me. Swinging his sword in a powerful wide slash, I decided to dodge and not take my chances here if he could bisect me. I swung my sword overhead, he blocked it with his other sword. Clang! He winced at the clash as his arm almost crumbled due to the power and he jumped back. Though he hadn't dropped his sword on the ground, I knew that arm would be fucked for the rest of his fight. Not only was I swinging my sword with 2 hands, but my strength was above his. If it hadn't been for his quick reaction, his arm would have broken. He probably was going to use some counter move when my hands would be busy and attack me with his other sword. If that worked, the fight would have been over. Sadly he didn't know my strength and assumed that I was just a normal guy. I attempted to slash at him, my sword cutting through the air like a whip. But Arthur's reaction time was perfect like always, he dodged back, smiled slightly, sidestepped my next slash, and used his swords to hit me 4 times. Clang! 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 I blocked 1 hit with my sword and the other 3 landed on my armor. Once again, the heavy armor protected me. Seems like using heavy armor was a smart idea. At first, it only tired me out while I moved against the small Frey. Due to my hawk vision, Arthur was also unable to hit anywhere lethal as my vision could see his hits. Though dodging them was a problem sometimes, it didn't mean that I couldn't position myself to move slightly and let it hit a thick place in the armor. Seeing that strong and wide slashes weren't working against him, I started using quick jabs and lighter, but faster slashes. Clang! 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 But still, Arthur always seemed to move away by a hair's length and dodge the attack. This was nothing short of raw talent. He was someone that people called a natural fighting genius, his body moves without thought and dodges the attack. The battle went on for some minutes, with my heavy armor, and his fast reaction time. We were in a stalemate. I wasn't winning, but I wasn't losing either. Well, at least until my strength potion ran out and I entered a weakened state. Suddenly, as I was rushing him, he blocked each by hits, metal clashed like it was a factory. The smell of sweat was becoming overwhelming, as this heavy armor wasn't easy to use. But suddenly Arthur stumbled due to a rock on the ground, he would catch himself within a second. But I wouldn't let such a chance go, I wasn't honorable like him. Clang! Somehow, impossibly, the man had used his sword and busted his arm, trying to direct my sword. I cut straight through his shoulder pad. Fwish! But unluckily, I wasn't able to draw blood. My goal there was to try and cut his shoulder or even whole arm. The deflecting had been impeccable, and even with my strength, Arthur had adjusted his body and not fallen on the ground. Clang! Clang! 2 hits landed on my chest plate again. By now I could notice that the place he was hitting was the same. I had seen a lot of movies and anime where someone continues hitting the same place. A normal person from this world would think that it was an original idea that no one had done before. But to me, it was so predictable, that I used those attacks he landed to try and cut him up. I wasn't beating Arthur Dane, but I wasn't losing either, at least not yet. The crowd seemed to be cheering, but I wasn't paying attention to that at all. Instead, this whole time I was using my hawk-like vision, changing perspectives with my hawk which was flying in the sky, and barely keeping up with Arthur. Finally, my strength potion's power started running out and with each clash, I was giving more and more ground. Even though I was cheating majorly here, I was having such difficulty here, this sucks. It's like installing hacks in a game and yet having other players beat you because they are just better. Fuck. His sword was so fast that I had difficulty keeping up. Just how the hell can a human be this good at swordsmanship? It's unnatural as hell. Though I wanted to say that it was foul play on Arthur's part, I knew that wasn't the truth. Our weapons created sparks as they clashed against each other, my stomach suddenly started churning and it felt like I was going to throw up. This was the first sign that I had about less than 2 minutes left of the potion and I was going to drop down on the ground like a potato after that. We were both trying to injure each other, but it all failed. His reaction time was too fast and my heavy armor was blocking all of his hits. Fuck it. I can't hold this any longer, this bastard will beat me if this continues any longer. I already gave the audience a fight to remember. Using magic openly was a big no, even if he had to lose. But small, unnoticeable magic wouldn't be a problem as no one would be able to notice. Running a bit back, just out of Arthur's sword distance, I looked at the ground where he would have to step on and I whispered under my breath. Moveritharum. The words that came out of my mouth were unnatural and unknown, it felt like I was being crushed by the earth even as I spoke them. Every magic in this world had a price. Once Arthur's feet stepped on the ground as he walked towards me, my heart jumped in elation. I forgot all the pain and almost wanted to scream in joy. But I held myself back, and instead, my gaze sharpened to inhumane levels. If I had my helmet off, people would have seen my eyes go from dark to yellow and then dilate to an inhumane level. The ground Arthur stepped on shifted slightly, and as soon as I saw him start tumbling I charged the man. Such a small move had broken his whole sense of balance and given me a chance. To him, it might seem like a coincidence or bad luck, to the code it would seem like he had finally stumbled due to tiredness. But this was all calculated, and I swung my sword towards his midsection. If the attack landed it would kill him, but as expected Arthur used his sword to redirect the attack to the side. But that was what I had planned as I dropped my sword and took out my dagger. Arthur tried to use his other hand but that arm was wrecked due to an injury he suffered earlier and he wasn't fast enough. He shifted his body to jump away from the blade and then he would have a chance to reposition himself. Bam! I body slammed him on the ground as if I was a wrestler, my heavy armor took the breath out of him and he dropped to the ground, motionless. I immediately had my knife pointed at his throat, but Arthur did not react. Immediately my heart stopped. Did I just kill the sword of the morning? I could see the Mad King looking at me gleefully, that one expression on his face said 1,000 words. I took off my glove and used my fingers to sense the pulse in his neck. Breathing a sigh of relief, I could feel my heart start beating again loudly in my ear and I smiled, taking off my helmet and throwing it in the air. Killing a king's guard in front of the Mad King would have been a terrible ending to this event and I would have probably ended with my head on a spike. The chances of escaping the middle of this ring were impossible, as I was surrounded by knights on all sides. People don't care about the rubbish knights, but those of noble families could earn you a debt that will be paid back in blood. I looked at the referee and pointed towards the unconscious Arthur. He is down. Do your job. The man finally came to his senses and smiled widely. The winner is Arthur Frey, the undefeated knight. His voice boomed through like lightning and the crowd cheered loudly. I could barely hear anything, though I noticed Robert throwing ale from his cup and towards me. He tried using the liquid to hit me, but he was failing horribly, though the excited smile never left his face. Then the referee came into the fighting pit together with some maesters to help the downed Arthur, carefully taking off his armor and checking for injuries right on the field. I only smile at them and stab my sword on the ground, leaving it behind for the king's guard I got this from to come and pick it up. I bowed towards the king, and surprisingly he seemed in a jovial mood and waved at me. With that, I went back towards my corner and into the fighters' rooms. As soon as I was out of sight I started taking off my heavy armor as fast as I could or else this thing would pull me to the ground once my strength potion wore off. After taking off my armor, I sat down and waited for the after effects of my potion to hit me. It felt like my stomach was already churning and burning as if I had drunk lava. Suddenly, I felt bile raise up my throat. Blag! I threw up on the ground strange red and green liquid that slowly sunk in on the floor. A feeling of weakness, nausea hits me like I hadn't slept for days and had no caffeine either. Every muscle in my body had been ripped apart and that would take a while to heal, I was at my weakest right now. Sigh. The things I do for power. After a few minutes, the pain in my body calmed down and I looked at my hand, it was still twitching but I could now clench it into a fist. I felt like a baby again, barely able to move anything. By leaning on the wall, I was able to get up and I took a deep breath, straightening myself and fixing my disheveled hair. Showing weakness wasn't something I ever planned to do in a cruel world like this, or it will eat me alive as soon as I do so. In the fighting rooms, there was only me and as I went outside, there were 2 of my soldiers keeping guard and my healer was there waiting for me. I had left them here since I didn't want anyone to see my weak state. Arthur, the undefeated knight. The people around took notice of my presence and cheered, it seemed like the stories about me had already started spreading. I wonder what kind of legendary figure I will be made into 100 years from now? Of course, with the normal people, the lords came in too and they were even more annoying since I couldn't refuse their kind gestures. Lord Arthur. Have you met my daughter? They say she is famous in the Riverlands. Famous for what? Sucking dick? I never even heard of her. But I could already guess what kind of boring girl she would be. Plus she probably was nowhere near a Dane either. But of course, while vile thoughts crossed my mind, on the outside I was all polite smiles. Oh, Lord Shawnee. It's a pleasure meeting you here. His face brightened once he heard me, seemingly surprised that I even knew of him and his small house. Well, I had a spy network for a reason, and remembering things like this was a basic need in this world. I spent over an hour greeting lords of minor houses, they introduced their daughters and some had even brought them along. I only smiled, fucking a Dane was different from messing around with some lord's daughter. Well, technically Ashura was a lord's daughter too, but there was no indication of her using our time together to try and honey trap me into marriage. As a man from modern times, I knew a honey trap when I saw one. Just like many things, people in the future were better at honey trapping too, and honestly, these girls that were being offered were amateurish at best. I just smiled and waved through the conversations with ease, leaving room for negotiations and not closing anything, while at the same time letting the lords dispute amongst themselves. I was the prize here after all. It was such a shame, I truly wasn't made for fighting. Cheating people like this with words was way easier for me. When I finally arrived at my tent I was left alone and finally relaxed my already overly abused body. The tent was like a small house and I had everything that I would need here. My lord, yelled out my healer as he interrupted me. 2 guards were also with him. Ah! I see now. Arthur looked at his guards and healer like always, with a nonchalant look and unguarded demeanor. What is the problem? Hopefully, it's something good. His words were softly spoken, but there was an undertoning threat there. But the men didn't seem bothered by it and they smiled. We got some news of the Iron Bank starting to act up, said the healer with a happy smile on his face, expecting some kind of reward. I see. Said Arthur, in a calm but hurried voice. He had a frown on his face and seemed to be in deep thought. He then took a long cloak from the clothing compartment on his tent and put it on. He walked past his guards hurriedly and rushing towards the exit of the tent. Suddenly he stopped and turned around, opened his mouth to say something, but before even a word could come out. Fwish! A dagger was stabbed straight into his heart. The assailant was the healer. Arthur's eyes widened in shock and he looked down, flowing out of him like hot life liquid. Fwish! Fwish! But it wasn't over though, as the 2 guards also stabbed him, one in the eye, having the dagger come out of the other side of the skull. While the second guard went for a more brutal attack and stabbed him in the groin area. Chapter 19, Playing with the Shadows. Blood dripped out of Arthur's body, pulling down on the ground. He coughed out blood, and blood also came out of his nose. The 3 men took out their knives at the same time with clear glamour, showing that they were professionals. They didn't make any silly movements or anything too flashy, a simple kill that went for a man's weak spots, heart, balls, and brain. They silently started cleaning their blades, no words were exchanged between the guards and the healer. Then they got ready to clear the body, and the first one to go forward was the healer. But as soon as he touched Arthur, the body on the ground started to disappear into specks of red light, like the crimson webs of a spider. What? Asked the healer with calm confusion. But the surroundings around them shifted and changed, and the next thing they knew they were all tied up. Arthur! I stared down at the tied up people in front of me. Using a weak hypnosis spell worked on most humans, and even would be able to put 1 to 5 people to sleep, depending on the potency. Though it was a weak class spell, it was very useful. Its drawback was that it could be resisted for some time and victims of the spell could also grow resistant to it after some time. So it had quite some drawbacks, but as long as it was used smartly, then its effectiveness was undeniable. But I had started using this spell as soon as they had come into my tent. I had already noticed before that they were enemies. If I had fought them head-on, I would lose. Even with magic, 3 professional assassins are deadly in close combat, especially since I was severely weakened. Sighing, I walked towards my dead subordinates and started unclothing them. I completely stripped them naked and even checked if they had any weapons hidden in their mouths or any other place normal people wouldn't check. After doing that, I take out 3 vials from my pouch. Magic had many uses in this world, and this was one of them. The Drought of Living Death had another name in a High Valyrian language, and it had a different meaning too. But by now I had learned quite a lot of strange potions names and changed their names into something simpler in my mind. Something that would help me remember their functions. I had to remember these things by heart because writing them down or having books about them around wasn't too good. I dropped the vials down the 3 assassins' throats. The Draught of Living Death, without the antidote, they will never wake up and their bodies will eventually die from hunger and dehydration. Magic in this world might not be the army-destroying kind, or even anything close to that. But even then, it didn't mean that it wasn't a useful tool when used correctly. Bam! I kicked one of them on the chest, probably cracking a couple of ribs. Then I slapped the others as hard as I could. This was done in an attempt to try and see if serum worked. Magic is an untrustworthy power, it will decline, become stronger or even go away completely sometimes. Trusting something like that was the last thing I would ever want. Still, none of the men showed any signs of being conscious. I extended my hand towards my healer's face and like an invisible mask, the face of the healer was pulled off and it showed a whole new face behind it. Fucking faceless men, I muttered, clenching my teeth in annoyance, but then I took a deep breath and calmed down. I had always been on guard against these guys as even with my magic I couldn't notice them. But they were still human, and although they copied the 2 guards perfectly, they missed one thing. The healer, they had copied him very perfectly too, but the way he walked while he was in my presence wasn't the same. When my healer sees me, he always walks a certain way and radiates a certain vibe around him. Something that they didn't copy. Pretty much, the healer was a kiss-ass, someone who always tried to please me. Normal people wouldn't probably even notice the minuscule change in behavior. But due to my hawk-like eyes, everything was laid in front of me. I assumed the worst when I noticed the small change, and it was the worst kind of situation. Faceless men went after me. Normal people wouldn't even notice, but with my hawk-like vision, I could see it. And immediately assumed the worst-case scenario, which was the worst. I can already guess who ordered the faceless men. Not a lot of people have this kind of power. So the options on who did it were limited, but that didn't mean that I would let them go. No. I will take care of this problem and rip it straight out of the root. Immediately I went towards the side of my tent and pulled out a large cloth and put all of the faceless men in the middle and made it into a sack with all of them inside. They might die, but I didn't care about it that much. I went outside and made sure to intensify the angry stride on my step. Guards! I called out, and immediately some people around looked at me curiously. But my guards immediately came towards me. Notify all of my men that we will be returning to Essos. They didn't question anything and just nodded. I then went back inside my tent and took out a quill and started writing a letter. My eyes suddenly flashed and my hawk showed another one of my men moving suspiciously. Oh, I know that guy, he was the spy sent from my friends if I am not mistaken. After I finished writing the paper, my red hawk came into my tent and I tried a letter to its leg. It knew what to do. I was returning to Bravos and there was a lot of work to be done there. As the hawk flew off, I smiled a little regretfully since now my eyes in the sky would be gone. But this was necessary, as its wings flapped and it flew up high in the sky without anyone noticing anything. As I saw this, I couldn't help but rethink some of my plans to stay in Westeros any longer. It seemed like watching the mad Prince Rhaegar Targaryen sealing his fate by doing something dumb wasn't something I would be able to witness. After around 5 hours I had everything ready and went towards the Ravenry of Harrenhal. There was another job that had to be done here. As I entered, I saw one of my soldiers, the only one who hadn't gathered yet and was supposed to be in the shitter. Good excuse, I will give him that since no one would question it due to the gross details. I stalked him like a cat and my steps were silent and just as he was about to tie a letter into a raven's leg. Fwish! I stabbed him on the back of his neck, the tip of my knife came out of the front of his jugular. He tried struggling, but it was for naught as strength was drained out of him and his body lost all signs of life. I grabbed the letter from his hand and smiled. As expected, it was a notice sent to. Suddenly I felt something strange and looked around. Someone else was in here with me? Fuck. The ravens were startled on the corner. Someone was there and I knew how birds behaved in these situations. I quickly copied the handwriting from the letter and changed the message and with one look into the raven's eyes, I subtly hypnotized the creature and sent off the note. Looking around, I pulled out my sword and looked around cautiously. Come out, I know you are there, I called out toward the pillar and a figure slowly came out. Chapter 20, Grand Manipulation. Arthur. The person in hiding came out and I was surprised about who it was. Robert Baratheon. Immediately I started calculating the risks of killing him. Ah! This sucks, if it had been anyone else I would have killed them too and cleaned up this mess. Now, this just became way more troublesome than intended. If my hawk had been here then such a problem wouldn't have arisen as he would have noticed Robert and notified me. But there was no use crying over spilled milk and I had to think of something new on the spot. Right now, even if I wanted to kill him I wouldn't be able to do so. Because he had his hammer in hand and while he didn't seem to be on guard against me, I was severely weakened due to the after effects of the strength potion, and even with the help of magic right now there was a good chance that the one dying would be me. This would develop into a mess that I won't be able to clean up. Instead of taking a violent approach, I sighed in exhaustion. Then with a sad smile on my face, I said to him, you know when I went to Essos I had it good in the beginning. Fighting, fucking and all that, then these little snakes start coming around and spying on me. He didn't say anything but just smiled at me. Hat, maybe I should come there and help you. No, you will have a war to fight here. Though I thought that, I didn't say anything about it. I contemplated using magic, but once again decided against it. Though the magic I had been using today was of the weak kind that mostly just consumed stamina, if I continued using it then it would start taking away my lifespan. Or as it was known in this world, as life fire, that was the term most mages used. I was not ready to sacrifice that. I wouldn't put this body that I had worked so hard to build. Plus the reputation wasn't copyable either. Unless it was a last resort, I would never use magic too much as it will start delving into dangerous territory. But also, I was worried about another thing. Would my resurrection spell even work? I hadn't tried it on anyone and in theory it should work. Magic in this world wasn't a math problem, 11 in magic didn't always equate to 2. If this body dies right now the hawk was nowhere near to pick my soul either. Though it would turn immediately once it felt that I had died, would my soul be preserved? Would I lose my memories? Maybe the hawk will be shot by some hunter while it was carrying my soul. Nothing in this world was ever guaranteed, less so something as wild as magic. Even if this succeeded and I took over one of my children's bodies, then due to people no longer being afraid of me they might hunt down my family to take my riches. Robert also has his uses. Sometimes it feels like I am surrounded with vipers out there, I complained to the man who I had manipulated into thinking he was my friend. Since this situation had come up, I better set up the foundation and deepen the friendship between us. If one day you become someone with authority, you will see that the people you can trust lessens the more powerful you become. I could see Robert's instincts and posture relaxing as he was listening to my story. He understood that I didn't kill someone recklessly as soon as I said that. Robert even had the gall to joke. the most authority I will ever have is managing the storm lands, which I will leave to someone else and just go and make a sellsword company. Ha, then I will be your first client, I joked back with him, even though I wouldn't ever let him become that. I had put in too much effort in this friendship for him to end up as some nobody on the other side of the sea. I looked at the body of my dead subordinate and kicked him hard. Fucking piece of shit, I swore at the man, trying to show that I was still angry to Robert. I gave this guy shelter when I found him naked in the roads of Pentos, and this is how he repays me? Sending letters to my enemies. Robert came close and looked at the body, he gave a mighty slap on the back that almost knocked me over. I was still weakened, so that slap was quite powerful in comparison. He didn't seem to notice that and just smiled at me. "Man, now, it was just one bad apple, no need to think all of your soldiers are scum like him. I just gave them so much and they betrayed me. Sigh. I will take care of the body, you can go to the other lords, Robert. I will take care of this," I said sadly as if I was still getting over the pain of this guy betraying me. "Well, his family will be toast now too. I will make an example out of them." "Are you sure you don't need help?" he asked, offering me to help get rid of the body. I shook my head in denial, there was no need for him to get involved. Then I just stared at Robert's back as he walked away. Does he sympathize with me? Because it seemed like he did. It seems like the friendship I built with him might be quite stronger than I had initially thought. Which was a good thing. It was good that he was inexperienced at these things. I also learned something today, pity was truly a powerful weapon. If someone pities you, then they are very easy to mold into the shape you want. After making sure that no one was around, I crouched down and touched the dead body and used a spell. The corpse turned into a strange dark liquid that soon evaporated. It was truly a shame to lose such a skilled young man. The bullshit story that I told to Robert was fake. I just picked this guy because I knew where his family lived. Men are willing to sacrifice their life for something like money or what they believe in. But they won't sacrifice their family too. Sighing, I stood back up and did some stretches to try and ease my muscles that were still in pain. I should go and take care of things on Bravos, some things required one to do them by himself, and by now everything should be in place. Walking down the Ravenry Tower, many plans came into mind and I tried to think of a way to execute them. I. Iron Bank Council member. Some people were born lucky and some were lucky to be born. That was what my father used to say. Looking around, I was sitting in a dark room with 8 other people. We were the main council members of the Iron Bank, we controlled it from the shadows. Even while meeting each other, we all wore masks to protect our identities from being discovered. Just in case one of us got captured and tortured for information. This was mostly an old tradition from the old times when Valeria was still around. Now, it was more of a traditional ceremony as I knew some of the identities of the members here. We must continue keeping up with the times as now the Valyrians are no longer around. Instead, we now use spies and try to get an advantage against each other. We were the game masters and the others were tools, they just didn't know it yet. Suddenly the doors of the room opened and the last member needed for the meeting to start came. Each of our masks had a number carved on it, from 1 to 9, of course, there was a 10th member that always only joined from the outside. He was the guy who we used as an excuse that even normal people could achieve a high position. Though in reality, this was something that could only be inherited. The 10th member had a blank mask, and he sat on his seat on the round table. "You are late, number 10, number 2 criticized him. Here, we could only call each other by number. The numbers don't mean power, but instead who was the most senior member amongst us. Sorry, it won't happen again, number 10 apologized sincerely. We all understood that time here equals money and we couldn't waste time as that would be the same as throwing money away. Finally that scum is dead. I say we immediately kill his family before they have a chance to escape," said number 5, the irritation was clear in his voice. Number 5 had always been mad at that upstart, Arthur Frey. Or should I say Arthur Redhawk? I guess it doesn't matter now. We must not act recklessly. We know that even though Arthur Redhawk had enemies, he had even more friends, uttered number 1, with a raspy voice that truly showed his age. Number 8 snorted. Well, he killed his enemies, that is the only reason he had more friends. Some of us laughed at the joke but others didn't. Then number 10 interfered with his usual calm voice. Was the death confirmed? Then I took this chance to speak. Yes, my spy confirmed it. My spy in his mansion also said that they got a message that he is dead, number 2 added wearily. He always was overly cautious at these things, afraid that his enemy would come back from the grave. Still, though, number 2 was impressive. I thought I was the only one with the spy in the Redhawk mansion that hadn't been killed. The others politely nodded along and then we got back to discussing how we will take over Arthur's businesses and assets. This was something I had prepared extensively, that man might have been an upstart, but he was also rich. I must concentrate on taking over his shipping system, which would make me the most powerful man in Bravos. Finally, I could also kill these guys and finally take over the Iron Bank and have it controlled by only me and my family. A dozen minutes passed and we were discussing how we would separate the assets equally amongst ourselves. Meaning we won't be giving number 10 anything and then the East was each for themselves. I paid for the assassins, number 2 remarked, trying to make a case for himself. And I made sure that none of the staff or his spies got any word of this. You think that was free? I needed to be headstrong with what I wanted and I don't care if it took years. I will get my hands on those ships. Even if everyone else wanted them too, then I will outlive all of these fuckers. Then in the middle of the discussion between me and number 6 on who will take over, number 10 intervened. I think you guys should calm down. I have a proposition, let's just take this slowly. We calmed down a little and looked towards number 10 to listen to what he had to say. I don't give a crap what he had to say, I just had to act cordial so the others didn't use it against me later on in an argument. Then number 10 takes a flask from under his robe and puts it on the table. You guys don't need to argue, because you are all going to die here. When we heard that for a second I was in shock. No, everyone else on the table was in shock too. Number 10 took out a needle and pierced the flask. Whoosh! Gas came out of the flask, soon I felt my vision start getting blurry, darkness claimed me. No, I can't die like this. Bam! I fall on the ground and even had some other bodies fall too. This isn't fair, life is so unfair. We were supposed to be the dragons, the predators, how can we die like this? Number 10. I looked at the others falling and the sense of joy I felt was exhilarating. Just some time ago I used to be nobody, but here I was now, killing the strongest people on Bravos. They thought that it would be smart to not bring guards here, that it was unneeded since we were deep within the premises of the Iron Bank. We were deep underground where the most secure vaults were, so nothing was happening down here. These men had worked a lot to keep all of these meetings secret. Seeing their dead bodies on the ground, I couldn't help but feel like my worries were washing away. The nervousness before I did this had been unsurmountable, but right now I am relieved like never before. This was the start of my story. I smiled while starting to walk outside the room, taking off my mask in relief. Also, the one who helped pull this said that Arthur Frey was alive, and I trusted that source because it was Arthur Frey himself. He told me to do this. He assassinated the previous number 10 and put me in charge. I went from an unsuccessful merchant to the soon-to-be boss of the Iron Bank. While I will still be under Arthur but as the boss of the Iron Bank and the public not knowing about our secret partnership, he still can't give me orders that I don't want to follow. So the relationship was one of equal partners. As I walked out of the chamber, the big hallways with high ceilings greeted me with the light barely able to get. But as I did so, dark clouds appeared in front of my eyes and my legs lost their strength. Bam! I fell on my knees, losing all the power in my is going on. A strange liquid came up my throat and I couldn't help but cough out something in my hand. Cough. Looking at the palm I used to cover my mouth, it was covered in blood. What? Am I poisoned? But before entering the room I drank the antidote given to me by Arthur. Red Hawk, that bastard. Cough. I spit out blood and tried to get up, but I only face planted into the ground. Damn it. Damn you, Arthur Red Hawk. I barely turned my head, and when I did so I noticed a red hawk, the one that had delivered Arthur's orders, had landed in front of me. The bird stared at me with a strangely intelligent gaze. Arthur. Through the eyes of my hawk, I looked at a man's dying face and confirmed his death, before disconnecting our sight. I returned to my body, skin changing was a truly convenient branch of magic. The smile that came onto my face as I docked my ship was exhilarating. Taking a deep breath I got ready to go back to Bravos, not to kill my enemies but take everything they have. Now I was just going there to take over the Iron Bank that they worked so hard to make richer. Ha 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 ha, I chuckled a little and went back into my room on the ship. All according to plan.